Elena lay propped against stiff white pillows, her swollen belly stretching the thin hospital gown, monitors humming softly beside her like distant warnings she tried not to hear. The room smelled of antiseptic and cold metal, a place meant for healing yet filled her with dread. Complications, the doctors said gently, voices careful, eyes serious. Too much stress. Too much strain. She nodded and smiled, pretending she was braver than she felt, pretending she wasn't terrified for the tiny life growing inside her. Still, beneath the fear, hope flickered stubbornly. Maybe this scare would change things. Maybe Marcus would finally slow down, sit beside her, hold her hand without glancing at his phone. He was a powerful man, a self-made millionaire whose world revolved around boardrooms and numbers, but once, long ago, he had been gentle with her. Elena clung to that memory like a lifeline, believing love could be salvaged if he would just look at her again. Hours passed in quiet isolation. Nurses came and went, kind but rushed. Elena checked her phone too often, each time disappointed. Marcus's calls had grown infrequent, his messages short and distracted. When he did visit, he stood near the window instead of her bed, answering emails while she spoke, as if her words were background noise to a more important life. She told herself it was stress, business pressure, nothing more. People drift apart and find their way back, she thought. This baby could be the bridge between them, the reason he remembered what truly mattered. Her fingers curled protectively over her belly, whispering silent promises to her unborn child. As night settled outside the narrow window, Elena stared at the ceiling, listening to machines mark time. Loneliness pressed heavily on her chest, sharper than physical pain. Yet even then, she refused to surrender hope. Love, she believed, did not disappear overnight. It faded slowly, quietly, unless someone fought to save it. She prayed Marcus would arrive before morning, sit beside her, and choose her again, unaware that distance had already grown too wide to cross without shattering her fragile heart. Marcus adjusted the cuff of his tailored suit as his driver cut through evening traffic, his reflection in the tinted window calm, controlled, untouchable. Power had shaped him that way. He lived for the respect in boardrooms, the envy in other men's eyes, the unspoken acknowledgement that he always won. Weakness irritated him, reminded him of things he refused to feel, and lately Elena's illness felt like an inconvenience he couldn't afford. Lydia, seated beside him, laughed softly, her manicured fingers tracing his sleeve. She was everything Elena was not anymore, radiant, carefree, intoxicating. With Lydia, he felt admired, desired, alive. She never asked for explanations or promises, only moments stolen in luxury hotels and shadowed corners. Secrecy thrilled her, and that thrill fed his ego. Being wanted without obligation felt like freedom. Marcus told himself he wasn't cruel, just realistic. Elena had changed, he reasoned, growing fragile, emotional, consumed by motherhood before the child was even born. She needed comfort, patience, sacrifices he no longer had the energy to give. He deserved passion, inspiration, someone who understood the pressure of success. Love, he decided, didn't have to mean loyalty when loyalty felt like a cage. As the hospital loomed ahead, sterile and unforgiving, irritation flickered beneath his composure. He knew he should go alone, play the role of the devoted husband. Yet he didn't want to face Elena's hopeful eyes without the reassurance Lydia gave him. He squeezed Lydia's hand, lowering his voice, promising it would be quick, harmless. She smiled knowingly, adjusting her coat as if stepping into a game she was sure to win. Marcus stepped out of the car convinced of his own justification. He would visit his wife, then return to the life he preferred, blind to the danger of arrogance. He believed control was permanent, that secrets stayed hidden if you were powerful enough, unaware that some betrayals begin unraveling the moment you stop looking over your shoulder. Confidence blurred into carelessness, and he mistook silence for safety, convinced consequences belonged to lesser men, never imagining the hospital walls already held witnesses watching everything unfold. Marcus entered the hospital room with practiced confidence, Lydia a step behind him, introduced casually as a business associate who had insisted on coming along. Elena lifted her head weakly at the sound of his voice, relief softening her pale features despite the exhaustion weighing her down. Wires traced across her skin, monitors blinking steadily, marking every fragile heartbeat. Seeing Marcus there, solid and familiar, eased her fear for a moment, and she smiled, unaware of how carefully he avoided her eyes. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air heavier. Lydia remained near the door at first, her posture polite, her expression carefully neutral. Yet even standing still, she radiated a presence that unsettled the space. Elena noticed it vaguely, through a haze of fatigue, but brushed the feeling aside. She was too tired to question anything, too focused on the baby's steady movements beneath her hands. Marcus spoke softly, but not to Elena. His words drifted toward Lydia in low murmurs, explanations about meetings, excuses wrapped in familiarity. When Elena closed her eyes briefly, lulled by medication and exhaustion, the distance between Marcus and Lydia shortened. A hand brushed an arm, a glance lingered too long. Their whispers carried an intimacy that had nothing to do with business. Elena stirred, half awake, sensing something wrong without understanding it. Marcus stood closer to Lydia now than to his wife, his body angled away from the bed. Lydia's fingers toyed with a strand of her hair as she listened to him, smiling in a way meant only for him. The contrast was cruel, Elena pale and vulnerable, Lydia vibrant and unbothered, both occupying the same space yet living entirely different realities. Monitors beeped softly, indifferent witnesses to the betrayal unfolding quietly. Marcus laughed under his breath at something Lydia said, the sound unfamiliar, intimate. Elena opened her eyes again, catching only fragments, his back turned, Lydia's lowered voice, a tension she couldn't name. She told herself she was imagining it, that stress made shadows out of nothing. As Elena drifted back toward sleep, comforted by the belief that her husband was finally beside her, Marcus leaned closer to Lydia, their shoulders nearly touching. The line between secrecy and shamelessness blurred, and betrayal took shape not in grand gestures, but in subtle, devastating moments happening just feet away from a hospital bed where trust still struggled to survive. The room was quiet except for the steady rhythm of the monitors and the distant hum of hospital life beyond the walls. Elena's breathing had slowed, her lashes resting against her cheeks as Marcus assumed she had finally fallen into a deeper sleep. Relief crossed his face, not for her comfort, but for his own freedom. He turned slightly, his voice dropping even lower as he spoke to Lydia, the space between them dissolving completely. Lydia stepped closer, her perfume cutting through the sterile scent of antiseptic. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the bed, then back to Marcus, daring him without words. He hesitated for a fraction of a second, a ghost of obligation brushing his conscience, then dismissed it just as easily as he had dismissed everything else. Power had taught him that rules bent when he wished them to. He leaned in and kissed her. It was not a quick mistake or an accidental brush. It was deliberate, lingering, intimate. His hand rested at her waist, familiar and possessive, as if the hospital room were no different from the private spaces where they usually hid. The act carried a quiet cruelty, performed beside a woman who had trusted him with her heart and her child. On the bed, Elena stirred faintly. A crease formed between her brows, her body reacting before her mind could catch up. Something felt wrong, deeply wrong, like a sudden chill passing through her. Her fingers twitched against the sheets, but her limbs felt impossibly heavy, trapped beneath medication and exhaustion. She could not open her eyes. She could not speak. All she could do was sense a presence that did not belong. Marcus pulled back slowly, unaware of the damage already done. In that moment, he crossed a line that could never be erased. The kiss was more than betrayal, it was the collapse of every vow he had once spoken, the stripping away of decency, timing, and respect. Beside the bed where life was being protected and fought for, he chose desire over duty. Elena's breathing steadied again, her face smoothing as she slipped back into unconsciousness, still unaware of the truth. But something fragile had cracked beyond repair. Marcus straightened his jacket, convincing himself nothing had happened, blind to the reality that some choices echo long after they are made, and this one had already begun to change everything. Dr. Daniel Reyes paused just outside the doorway, one hand still resting on the patient chart, his trained eye instinctively taking in every detail of the room. He had come to check on his sister between surgeries, expecting the familiar sight of Elena sleeping, fragile yet alive. What he saw instead made the world narrow and sharpen into something dangerously quiet. Marcus stood with his back half-turned, far too close to the woman beside him. Daniel watched, unmoving, as the moment unfolded in slow, unforgiving clarity. The kiss was unmistakable. Intimate. Intentional. It happened beside Elena's bed, beside the machines guarding her life and the unborn child she carried. For a split second, Daniel felt something primal surge through him, hot and violent, demanding immediate action. His jaw tightened, but he did not move. Years in operating rooms had taught him control under pressure, how to keep steady hands even when lives were slipping away. That discipline wrapped itself around his rage, compressing it into something far more dangerous than an outburst. He thought of Elena as a child, following him through hospital corridors, trusting him without question. He thought of the nights she had defended Marcus, insisting he was just busy, just tired, just misunderstood. Daniel's fingers curled slowly against the chart. Confrontation now would change nothing. It would only alert Marcus, give him time to hide, to manipulate, to escape consequences as men like him always did. Daniel understood systems, hierarchies, weaknesses. Surgeons learned where to cut for maximum effect, and this was no different. He stepped back into the shadows as Marcus pulled away, unaware of the eyes that had seen everything. Daniel glanced at Elena's face, pale and peaceful in sleep, and the protectiveness nearly broke his composure. He made her a silent promise then, one forged not in anger, but in precision. There would be no shouting, no scenes, no reckless moves. Marcus would not even realize when the consequences began. Daniel turned and walked away, his expression calm, his steps measured, already planning how to dismantle a betrayal piece by piece, with the same exact care he used to save lives. Daniel moved carefully, the way he did before a difficult operation, gathering information without leaving a trace. Between surgeries and late-night chart reviews, he began making quiet calls, reaching out to people who owed him favors earned over years of saving lives. Hospital administrators, legal consultants, a former patient now working in financial compliance, each conversation revealed another crack in Marcus's polished image. What Daniel found was not a single mistake, but a pattern of entitlement disguised as success. There were shell companies masking losses, investors misled by carefully worded reports, and aggressive tactics that edged past legality. Marcus believed his wealth insulated him, that money and influence erased consequences. Daniel cataloged everything with methodical patience, storing documents, timelines, and names, building a case piece by piece. Rage fueled him, but he refused to let it guide his hand. Precision mattered more than speed. While Daniel worked in silence, Marcus unraveled in plain sight. He grew careless, convinced his world was stable, untouchable. He missed Elena's calls without hesitation, sent brief messages instead of visiting, and dismissed doctors' updates as inconveniences. Her condition worsened, stress aggravating every complication, yet Marcus brushed it aside, confident there would always be time later. He spent more nights with Lydia, louder, bolder, no longer bothering to hide his arrogance. Success made him reckless. He joked about rules, laughed at warnings, and believed loyalty was something only weaker men required. The contrast sickened Daniel. One man was fighting quietly for justice, the other drifting comfortably toward ruin without noticing the knife already poised. Daniel watched, waited, and refined his plan. He understood timing as well as anatomy. Strike too early and the damage was superficial. Strike too late and the infection spread. He ensured every discovery was verified, every move clean, leaving no space for Marcus to deflect blame or manipulate the narrative. As Elena slept under careful observation, Daniel stood at her bedside one evening, his resolve hardening. He would protect her not with violence or confrontation, but with truth exposed at the right moment. Marcus's downfall would not come from emotional retaliation, but from his own secrets turned against him. Daniel stepped away, calm and focused, knowing the operation was nearly ready, and when he finally acted, there would be no recovery from what he had uncovered. Marcus sensed the shift before he understood it. Meetings were postponed without explanation. Calls went unanswered. Within days, auditors appeared, polite but relentless, requesting documents he hadn't reviewed in years. Long-standing partners suddenly distanced themselves, citing concerns, compliance issues, reputational risk. Headlines followed, sharp and unforgiving, exposing cracks in the empire he believed unshakable. Each revelation fed the next, scandals surfacing with surgical timing, too precise to be coincidence. He searched desperately for the cause, cycling through enemies, rivals, disgruntled investors, but none fit. Panic crept in as accounts froze and lawyers spoke in careful, ominous tones. The control he had built his identity around slipped through his fingers, leaving confusion and rage in its place. Power had always protected him. Now it abandoned him without warning. Lydia vanished just as swiftly. Messages went unread. Calls rang endlessly. The woman who had thrived on luxury and secrecy wanted nothing to do with public disgrace. Marcus realized too late that admiration had never been loyalty. Alone in penthouses that felt suddenly hollow, he replayed recent weeks, blind to the truth standing closest to him. Across town, Elena slowly began to heal. The danger eased, doctors' voices growing calmer, their expressions less tense. Strength returned in small increments, measured in deeper breaths and steadier heartbeats. Daniel visited often, offering quiet reassurance, never speaking of Marcus beyond what was necessary. He listened, held her hand, reminded her she was not alone. Emotionally, Elena shifted as well. The constant ache of waiting, hoping, excusing began to loosen its grip. Marcus's absence no longer felt like a wound, but a strange relief. She focused on her baby, on recovery, on the unexpected peace that came with lowered expectations. Daniel watched it all silently. He never spoke of the hospital room, the kiss, the moment that had changed everything. He didn't need to. The consequences were unfolding exactly as intended. Justice did not always announce itself loudly, sometimes it arrived quietly, dismantling illusions piece by piece. As Marcus stood surrounded by the wreckage of his former life, searching for someone to blame, Elena rested under soft hospital light, supported by the one man who had never looked away. And though the truth remained unspoken, it moved invisibly between them, waiting for the moment it would finally be revealed. Daniel waited until there was nothing left for Marcus to lose. When they finally stood face to face, there was no anger in Daniel's voice, only calm precision that cut deeper than shouting ever could. He told Marcus he had been there that day in the hospital, standing in the doorway, watching him kiss another woman beside Elena's bed. Marcus went pale, the realization settling slowly, painfully, as Daniel continued. Every audit, every exposed lie, every collapsing partnership had been deliberate. Consequences, Daniel said quietly, were not accidents. They were choices catching up. Marcus tried to speak, to defend himself, to argue power and circumstance, but nothing came out right. For the first time, he saw himself clearly through someone else's eyes, stripped of status and excuses. Daniel did not threaten him or raise his voice. He simply turned away, the confrontation finished, leaving Marcus alone with the weight of what he had done. Elena learned the truth later, gently, in fragments Daniel shared only when she was strong enough to hear it. The pain was sharp, but clean, no longer blurred by doubt or hope. She cried, not from shock, but from clarity. Knowing freed her. She chose not to rage or seek revenge. Instead, she chose dignity. The divorce papers were filed quietly, her signature steady, her resolve unshaken. She reclaimed herself piece by piece, no longer measuring her worth by a man who had failed her. When her child was born, the room was filled with warmth instead of fear. Daniel stood nearby, family close, love present and real. Elena held her baby against her chest, tears of relief and joy falling freely. This was the life she would build now, grounded in truth, supported by loyalty that did not waver. Marcus heard the news alone. There were no celebrations waiting for him, no admiring glances, No one to share the silence. Regret settled heavily, too late to change anything. Justice did not roar. It whispered, steady and inevitable. Loyalty protected the innocent. Restraint proved more powerful than fury. And Elena's new beginning rose quietly from the ruins, strong, unbroken, and free.